Well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And my name is Crystal Spell, and I'm the program manager for Veteran Saves, a program of America Saves that's managed by the Consumer Federation of America. And so at Veteran Saves, we encourage veterans and transitioning service members and the military connected community to build financial stability one step at a time through practical steps. And while saving money is a big part of what we do and like to share about, it's also about helping people find ways to save and make informed financial decisions and take advantage of the benefits and resources that you've earned, which is exactly why we're excited to host today's session, Planning to Pay for College, What Veterans and Military Families Should Know. And whether you're thinking about going back to school yourself or, helping your spouse or children plan for college, or just, simply trying to understand your education benefit options, we know that that can be a lot to navigate. Military education benefits, scholarships, and just everyday college expenses can feel overwhelming, especially when you're trying to make the best financial decision for yourself or your family and save money. And so today's webinar is designed to help make that process a little easier by providing some, practical information and resources that you can use to plan. Before we get started, I have just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you so you can rewatch or share. We'll also save some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have a question at any point during the presentation, please enter it into the Q&A box and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Kate Horrell. Kate is an award-winning financial educator, an accredited financial counselor, a chartered financial consultant, and a military qualified financial planner, and the author of the award-winning book, College Finances for Military Families, including post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. And so she's also a military spouse and the mother of four. So she's not only guided countless families in the military connected community through education planning and financial planning, she's also helped her own children figure out how to pay for college. So she comes with a lot of professional experience and real life experience to today's session. And we are so thankful and grateful to have her here with us today. So, Kate, thank you again for being here, and I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I am thrilled to be here. Welcome, everyone. I think that was a great introduction, so you know who I am. And what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the college financial planning process, and then also how you can integrate your military and veteran benefits into that planning process. I do just want to start out by saying this is a very surface level covering of this. You are going to have a lot of questions that are not answered because we're not going to be here till dinner time. So feel free to put those questions in wherever they're going. Sorry, Crystal, I don't remember what we're called wherever the questions are going.
Oh, it's
But
the Q&A.
the Q&A, put them in there. Hopefully we'll have time to get to them. If not, you are always welcome to reach out to me privately. And now my screen is not advancing as it was. Oh, there we go. My email address is right here, and I love to answer questions. And you can also reach me at my website. So we're going to dig right in. Whether you are looking for yourself, your spouse, your kids, who knows, your little sibling, what are the ways that you pay for college? Like, how do you figure this process out? Well, there's a couple of different tactics that you need to put together to build a financial planning strategy. And at the very highest level, they are smart school selection, including using in-state tuition benefits when that's, applicable to your situation. Also understanding how colleges and universities grant both merit aid and need-based aid. The vast majority of financial aid for non-military people is coming from school-based aid, money that is being given directly from the school to the student. We're going to talk a little bit about college savings and cash flow. We're going to go over some of the military and VA education benefits. We're also going to talk a little bit about federal aid and private scholarships. And lastly, we're going to do just a surface level on student loans. It is a lot. Oh, Can we close this, do you think? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Oh,
No, we can't.
uh-oh. What did you need to close?
Well, I was hoping not to show us
Oh, I'm
over
not sure.
top of the, oh, well, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So the first concept I want to introduce to you is financial fit. You'll hear a lot in the planning process, especially if you're working with your kids, about finding their fit. Where's a good place for them academically? Where's a good place for them socially? And this is important, but finding your financial fit is super crazy important. And a lot of people sort of put that on the back burner and they don't think about money until after they've gotten pretty far down the financial aid, the college planning process. I want to encourage you to start early. Want you want to talk to your kids about what resources you have available for school and how much you see yourself realistically contributing. That number is going to be different for every family. We're going to talk a little bit more about where that money might come from. But then you want to take the information you know about what you can afford and you want to compare that to how much a school is going to cost. So there's all different ways you can sort of figure out how much a school is going to cost. The internet is a great resource, but you want to understand that if you go to, say, University of Maryland cost of attendance, and it's going to show you a number, that's likely not the number you're going to pay. Now, at a state school, it might be pretty close because state schools don't always offer the most financial aid. But if you're talking about a smaller school, a private school, there's a really good chance that that cost of attendance has nothing to do with the number that you may actually pay for that education. So every school has something called a net price calculator. Some of them make it very easy to find, some of them make it very hard to find. But if you put in the name of, two of my kids went to Rollins College. So put in Rollins College net price calculator and it's going to bring up some sort of tool in which you put in information and it tells you how much they expect that they're going to ask you to pay out of your pocket. So this is a great starting point to see, oh, well, what would be a common amount of financial aid for this school? Now, it's important to understand that these net price calculators are not all equal. So they're only good as the inputs they ask you for. If you go to one school's net price calculator and it asks you about your kid's GPA and their SAT scores, that's probably going to be a little bit more accurate than a net price calculator that doesn't ask for that information. So you're just going to want to use this. It's not a be all end all, but it's a starting point. And then another tool that I encourage you to use is my college financial planning template. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. You could find this at my website. You download it and you start looking at schools that you're interested in. And you put in, hey, how much is tuition plus room and board? What does the net price calculator estimate our final net cost is going to be? This page is not any sort of magic. You can do it however you want to do it. But if you don't have a place to start gathering all of this information together, this is a way to do it. And the college financial planning template that's at my website has multiple pages. This is just one of the pages that's included in it that allows you to plan out for 3 or 4 years at multiple different schools. You could adjust this page. Say you're a Florida resident, you can adjust this page and you can put in a column for how much Bright Futures is going to pay. Or if you live in Georgia, you can put in a column for how much their state benefits are going to pay. The point of it is not the template. The point of it is to gather information about multiple schools right next to each other so that you can look at them all together. So no matter how you do this, I very strongly encourage you to start having a financial plan. One of the most, I think the saddest thing I see is when families make a commitment to a school and then they realize they can't afford it. Or even worse, their kid goes there for 2 years, maybe 3 years, and they can't afford to finish out that college degree. So that's the worst of both worlds, right? You've spent a whole bunch of money, you've maybe taken on loans, but there's no degree coming out of the other end of it. And this happens, unfortunately, more than you would think. So let's try to avoid that by building a financial plan that includes all 4 or 5 years that your kid may go to college. So I mentioned a little bit about in-state tuition. So civilian kids, it's pretty simple. They typically get in-state tuition where they live, right? If you're a civilian family and you live in Virginia and you graduated from a Virginia high school, you're going to get in-state tuition at Virginia schools. Active duty military families and some veteran families have a little bit more leeway. Their kids might be eligible for in-state tuition in multiple places. Under federal law, if you are on active duty, you and your children and your spouse are eligible for in-state tuition wherever you're stationed. So if you're a Florida resident but you're stationed in Virginia, you're going to get in-state tuition in Virginia. Also, in almost all cases, that active duty service member and their kids are probably going to get in-state tuition in the place where they're a legal resident. 3 of my 4 kids went to college in Florida because we were legal residents of Florida, even though we lived in Maryland when they started going to college. And we were able to take advantage of Florida education benefits because my husband and I were both legal residents of Florida. And then, most importantly, almost anyone who is using a VA education benefit, whether that's the Montgomery GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill, Dependents Educational Assistance Program, is probably eligible for in-state tuition while they are using that benefit. There are 1 or 2 little exceptions, but for the most part, if you're using VA education benefits, you're going to be able to get in-state tuition or a tuition equal to in-state tuition while you're using those benefits. So those are the laws. But beyond the laws, some other states will offer you in-state tuition just because you're military or just because you meet some sort of criteria that they have laid out in their policies. And then some schools, if say you start using VA education benefits and they let you have in-state tuition because they have to, but you stop using VA education benefits, they might let you keep that in-state tuition. This can be extremely powerful for families who may be trying to use the post 9/11 GI Bill for multiple kids. For example, you have a family with 2 kids, 1 GI Bill, so 36 months. First kid goes to Penn State. Penn State is one of the schools that if you use a semester of GI Bill benefits, they'll let you keep in-state tuition the whole time as long as you keep going to school. So first kid uses a semester, gets that in-state tuition rating, and then the parents use their other resources to pay for Penn State, and then the second kid comes along and wants to go to NYU. Well, now they've got all of the rest of the GI Bill to pay for NYU. So some schools, and you're going to want to research specifically. I do have a list on my website. I update it annually. That does not mean things could not change in between. So you always want to verify this with your schools, but this is a very powerful benefit that may be available to you. So I mentioned that the vast majority of financial aid is going to come directly from the schools. And that is either need-based aid based upon your financial status, or it may be merit aid. Need-based aid uses information that is gathered either from the FAFSA, which is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is technically an application for federal benefits, but the schools use that information to make determinations about their own need-based aid. And about 300 smaller schools use what's called the CSS. CSS profile. It used to stand for something, and then they just abbreviated it to CSS. And that is an alternate profile that gathers slightly different information, but that's what these schools use to make determinations about need-based aid. So you should expect that you're going to want to fill out the FAFSA and or the CSS for every school that your kid goes to. Now, the FAFSA, you can list a whole bunch of schools on, so that's easy peasy. The CSS, may or may not, depending on which schools they're applying to. So merit aid is aid that is not necessarily need-based. It is typically not need-based, although sometimes there is a need component. And this is for academic achievement, athletics, artistic achievements. And then I also listed on here hybrid or other aid, which would be like merit aid that has a need-based component to it. Maybe they've got a merit aid. Maybe they've got athletic scholarships and your kid is a great athlete, but they have a little internal policy that if your family makes $7 million a year, they're not going to give you an athletic scholarship, right? So that would be considered some sort of hybrid aid. So this is where most of the money for school for non-military families is coming from. And it may be where most of your money comes from too, depending on how you choose to allocate your benefits. So when I talk about allocating your benefits, you want to think about the fact that every family has a different set of resources to use to pay for education. And that includes all of these things: savings, student loans. Wow, there is a really big typo in here. Uh, Dependents educational assistance, state benefits, student employment, things like that. But what's most important to know about that is that some of those resources can be used only by that student. And some of those resources can be reallocated within the family. So let's say you have a situation where you've got three kids, all three kids are interested in going to college. When you start thinking about paying for each individual student, you're going to want to, not always, but you're going to want to first think about which one of these benefits are going to disappear if we don't use them for this student. Most scholarships, including school scholarships, school grants, are tied to the student. If University of Maryland gives little Johnny $1,000 to come there, Johnny can't say, "Oh, could you give it to my sister Janie?" That's not how school aid is going to work. Dependent educational assistant benefits, which are a VA benefit, they're tied to the student. Things like the Florida Bright Futures program. You can't transfer that to your sibling. Student loan limits are tied to the student, but you may have a lot of resources that can get moved around between the family members. And those would include 529s, just regular savings, post 9/11 GI Bill, income from working, right? Money that's happening as you go on. I put support from family on that side. Occasionally, you will get a grandmom or granddad who really has it in their head, no, like I'm giving $5,000 to Johnny, and they just are not willing to budge on that. And that's, obviously, this is a gift. You have to work with that. 529 prepaid plans, I just put a little asterisk next to them because while they are typically, you can reallocate them, they maybe aren't as easy or uncomplicated as some other resources. So this is a super important part of the process is you want to think about, well, which assets do we have that can go to which person? And which assets do we have that are fluid and can be used in the most advantageous way possible? So I promised to tell you a little bit about student loans. Student loans have a bad rap and they also have a good rap. They are what they are. They are a tool that can be used for great things, or they can really get you in great big trouble. Now, there have been some pretty large changes to the student loan rules, particularly if you have not looked into paying for college since you were a student. You would be surprised by the number of student loan rules that have changed. Almost every student out there, if they fill out the free application for federal student aid, is going to be eligible for federal student loans. These are in the student's name, and they may be subsidized, which means that the federal government may pay the interest while you're in school, or they may be unsubsidized, which means the interest is accruing. You don't need to make payments, but that interest is accruing while the student is in school. These loans have very low annual limits: $5,500 for freshman year, $6,500 for sophomore year, and $7,500 for junior, senior year. And then there is actually a total cap, which I should have put on the slide. I think it's around $31,000 this year. that you, even if you went to school for a bajillion years, you can't borrow more than that cap, and it's not super duper high. Then the next most popular loan are what are called Parent Plus loans. Plus stands for parental loan for use by students. The parent on these is the borrower. And this is one of the places that recent legislation has made big changes. It used to be that you could borrow a lot more money. Now it is $20,000 per year, up to a total of $65,000 per student. So, you put together $20,000 from a Parent Plus loan plus $5,500 from a federal student loan in the student's name, you're only at $25,000 worth of loans. $25,000 is at the very low end of what you're looking at for a 4-year school if you include room and board. So you want to be very aware of what your borrowing capacity is. Now, I'm by no means saying that you should go out and borrow all of this. You want to make sure that's part of a well thought out plan, and are very cognizant of what repayment of these loans is going to look like. But at least those have somewhat low limits. Where people can really get into these higher limits is with private student loans. These are always going to require either that the parent be the borrower or someone co-signs for the loan. That interest does start accruing immediately. They may require payments while the student is still in school, but these can have much higher annual limits. One of the phrases I like to ask people when they start talking to me about borrowing larger amounts of money is I will ask them, so how much have you been saving every month for college in the past? Typically the number, we've been putting $50 a month into a college account, or we've been putting $500 a month in a college account, or we've been putting nothing into a college account, whatever. The number is not important. What is important is if you're talking about taking out a loan that's got a $1,500 payment and you haven't been consistently saving $1,500 a month in the past, tell me what's going to change that you're all of a sudden going to be able to afford a $1,500 a month payment. And sometimes there are truly valid answers to this. It might be our mortgage is going to be paid off, or mom is finishing up her own education program and her salary is going to go up $20,000 a year, right? But this is a question to ask yourself realistically. How are you going to make these loan payments? Because this is where people can really sometimes get into trouble with larger loans, especially if you take out larger loans for your first kid and then you've got 2 more kids coming down the pike, and now you've sort of painted yourself into an uncomfortable corner. So that is the basics of student loans. So I want to talk about the military and VA education benefits that are available to you. Obviously, you want to use these whenever possible. Tuition assistance for the active duty and the reserve component, incredible benefit. Lots of limitations. You can only take so many classes at a time, usually an annual cap. Sometimes if the budget is rough, a service will just say, we don't have any more TA money for this year. You have to wait till the next fiscal year. Spouse Works, which used to be called My CAA, they actually just last week changed the eligibility requirements so that more people are eligible to use it, which is fantastic. If your spouse is currently on active duty, My Spouse Works has some program limitations, but there are ways to work within them to try to accomplish your goals, even if your goal isn't necessarily within how the program is structured. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? The post 9/11 GI Bill is the biggest educational asset for most families. And it can be used by the service member, the veteran, or it can be transferred to a spouse and or children. Dependents educational assistance is for people who are 100% permanently and totally disabled. And then the Fry Scholarship is available to surviving spouses and children of active duty deaths. So there is something for almost everyone. And then the question becomes, well, how do we use these smartly? And I'm really going to dig in on the post 9/11 GI Bill because that is the one that has the broadest eligibility, and also it can be the largest value of all of these programs. Now, I am not going to go in depth into the process and requirements for transferring those benefits. That's like another webinar. But you want to make sure that you are aware of the transfer deadlines, the timeline for when you want those benefits to get transferred, if that is part of your family's financial plan. So the post 9/11 GI Bill actually has like 6 or 7 benefits, but primarily it has 3 main benefits. It pays tuition, it pays a monthly housing allowance, and it pays a books allowance. Now you'll notice that I put a little asterisk about in-state tuition on here. Well, that is not a benefit of the GI Bill itself. If using the GI Bill gets you in-state tuition, well, that is a benefit, right? And then I've put a little asterisk next to the Yellow Ribbon Program, which is a subsidiary program of the post 9/11 GI Bill that works with tuition. And I'm going to go over that briefly in a few more slides. So, what does the post 9/11 GI Bill pay for tuition? At public schools, it will pay up to full tuition and fees for an in state student. And your kid's going to probably get, you or your kid are going to get in state tuition, right? Because you're using the GI Bill. For private schools, it will pay tuition and fees up to an annual cap. For the next school year, it's just about $30,000 a year. And then if your student is eligible for the Yellow Ribbon Program, and this is basically only at private schools, there's some little tricks and nuances there. There are a few situations in which public schools would use it, but it may help to pay tuition beyond the cap that the post 9/11 GI Bill pay. So if your school is $50,000 a year and the GI Bill is going to pay 30, Yellow Ribbon may help you pay that extra $20,000 that remains. There are a few, I could do an entire hour on the Yellow Ribbon Program, but the key things I want you to know are this only works when you're using post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. The number one myth I hear about Yellow Ribbon Program is that it is some sort of program that's going to help you out when you're not using the GI Bill. And that's not true. I characterize it as a sidecar. The Yellow Ribbon Program is the motorcycle, and the GI Bill is the motorcycle, and the Yellow Ribbon Program is the sidecar. If the motorcycle's not running, if you're not spending post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, you cannot receive Yellow Ribbon benefits. That sounds more complicated than it is, but basically just understand that the Yellow Ribbon Program is just a little plug-in to the post 9/11 GI Bill. It doesn't do anything without the post 9/11 GI Bill. It is 100% optional. Schools do not have to participate in this program, and they can participate in a very small way or in a very large way. Their participation is a contribution towards that tuition that exceeds the GI Bill cap. So in the example that I just gave, let's say the school tuition is $50,000 a year. GI Bill pays $30,000. So you have this $20,000 tuition bill remaining. The school will make a contribution towards that $20,000 remaining tuition. It is not uncommon for it to be half. So let's say the school contributes $10,000, and then the VA will match that contribution. So in this example that I'm giving, the school contributes $10,000, the VA contributes $10,000. That fills up that whole $20,000 of tuition that was going to need to come out of your family's pocket, but now it doesn't because the Yellow Ribbon Program has kicked in. It is important to understand that not every school will do the full half of that amount. Sometimes it is a smaller amount. So maybe the school will only contribute $5,000 and the VA matches the school contribution. So they pitch in $5,000. So there may be money left over that needs to come out of your pocket. Also, not every school will do this for an unlimited number of students. They may only offer these benefits to 5 students or 10 students a year. This is on an application basis. They are required by the VA to offer them on a first come, first serve basis. And so if you are looking at a school that has 10 Yellow Ribbon slots, but they've got 100 GI Bill students, well, you know that 90 of those GI Bill students are not getting this benefit. So you want to understand, what is the competition like at your school? Are there, is there any plans to change their contribution? And while the VA has a great website that offers information, always confirm the VA's information with the school because it can and does change. And the VA website doesn't always keep up with those changes. So the second big part of the post 9/11 GI Bill is the monthly housing allowance. This is based on the zip code of the primary campus where the student goes to school. And there is a flat rate for students who go 100% online or go overseas. This can be anywhere from $1,200 a month to $5,000 a month. So where you go to school really strongly influences how much housing allowance you're going to receive. Now, of course, where you go to school is also going to impact how much your housing costs. So there is a little bit of an urge to say, oh, well, I'm going to go to school in New York City because they've got a huge housing allowance. Well, that's not necessarily a benefit to you if you also have a huge housing expense. But the fact that those rates change so much, vary so much from school to school, may be part of your financial planning strategy. It's useful to know that if you do not go at least half time, you don't get any housing allowance at all. So if full time at your school is 12 credit hours, you need to go at least 7 credit hours in order to receive the housing allowance. And then anywhere between half time and full time, it does get prorated. And importantly for planning, it is only paid for days in the term. So let's say your school term starts at the end of August and ends at the beginning of December. You'll only get paid for the actual days of the term in August and December. Then you'll be paid for the whole month of September, October, and November. So that is important if families are counting on, let's say, $3,000 a month and December rolls around and they only get $1,000, this could be a financial hardship for them. So you want to make sure you understand how that's going to work in the months that are not fully within a school term. There's also a books allowance. This is paid at the rate of $41.66 per credit hour until you reach $1,000 per academic year. The academic year runs August to July. So, for example, if your student goes to school in the fall and they take 15 credit hours, they're going to get, wow, I should know this off the top of my head. They're going to get 15 times $42. For the fall, it's going to be more than $500. And then in the spring, they're going to get less because they can only max out up to $1,000 per academic year. Another key point that you need to understand about the post 9/11 GI Bill, and this is where strategy can become very important, is that it is always the last payer of tuition. And I'm going to show you an example of that. There are 36 months of eligibility per sponsor. So if you have one person in your family who has earned the post 9/11 GI Bill and they've transferred it to everybody, there's 36 months, period. Now, if you are, say, a Guard or Reserve family or a family that did not serve as many years, they may not have the full eligibility, but it's always 36 months. Just sometimes, particularly for our Guard and Reserve families, they may not pay at 100% of the rate, but they still get 36 months. That gets a little confusing, and that definitely reach out to me if you are in that situation. And again, those benefits are charged and paid by the day. Like I said, if school starts on October 20th, you're only going to get charged for 10 days of August. Did I say October? August 20th. You're only going to get paid for 10 days in August, but you're only going to get charged for 10 days in August. So while we talk about the GI Bill in months, it's actually calculated on a daily basis. So back to that last payer of tuition thing. If you have a bunch of other college resources, this becomes very important. Sometimes other sources of aid that you receive might only be allowed to use for tuition. This is a concept called fencing. So say you get the commissary scholarship. Maybe it says you can only use it towards tuition. Maybe the school gives you a scholarship and it can only be used towards tuition. If that happens, the GI Bill is just going to pay less. And so you want to know that before you go in there. So in my example on the left, the student hasn't gotten any merit aid. The tuition at their school is $30,000 a year. The GI Bill limit for next year is 30,908. So their tuition just gets paid in full. Easy peasy, right? In the example on the right, the student got a $15,000 merit aid and they thought, great, that's an extra $15,000 to pay for everything else. And that is true if that merit aid can be used for anything. But sometimes that merit aid says $15,000 towards tuition. In that situation, the merit aid is going to be applied first, and the GI Bill will pay the remaining amount, but that extra GI Bill just goes away, right? It doesn't show up in your pocket. It can't, the tuition portion of the GI Bill cannot be used for other purposes because you have other portions of the GI Bill, right, that are meant to be for other purposes. So in this situation on the right-hand side, maybe that merit aid was only for the freshman year. And so the family says, you know what, we're going to figure out how to pay this difference out of pocket. We're going to save our valuable GI Bill days for a different semester or a different school year or a different student who can get a bigger bang for their buck out of this GI Bill. So when I talk about thinking about that strategically, well, what are some questions you want to ask yourself? Who is eligible to use the post 9/11 GI Bill and who has an interest in more education? We want to make sure this question includes parents because sometimes a parent using the post 9/11 GI Bill is the most valuable thing you can do with it, particularly if it's going to increase their earning potential and that's going to last over decades. That might be a great use of it. What is each student's likely educational path? Some This very frequently requires a little bit of crystal balling, but if you have a child who's a sophomore in high school and has zero interest in going to college, well, you don't want to build a financial aid strategy for your family that puts them through college if they're not going to go to college. Are any or more of any of your students more or less likely to receive school-based aid? Sometimes we know this about our kids, right? Maybe you have a kid who's a super duper test taker. Maybe you have a kid who really struggles in school. Um, I always hate to use athletics as an example because athletic scholarships are so much more rare than people think they are. But maybe you literally have the most spectacular standout basketball player in the universe. And so and your family's flexible enough that they would choose to go to a school that gave them an athletic scholarship. What does this school cost without using post 9/11 GI Bill benefits is a big question. Because if the school's only going to cost $5,000 a semester, maybe this isn't a good use of your post 9/11 GI Bill. How does that in-state tuition factor into other things? What other resources might you use if you didn't use the post 9/11 GI Bill? And then again, what is the housing allowance at that location? If your two kids are going to school, one of them's going to school in San Francisco and one of them's going to school in Paducah, Kentucky, it might make more sense to use the GI Bill at the school in San Francisco to get that $5,000 a month housing allowance. And that might even just pay for Paducah entirely, right? I don't think there's a college in Paducah, but we're gonna roll with this anyway. So how do you get started on this plan? Well, first of all, you want to get smarter. I've given you the very surface level of things to think about, but there is a lot of information to know. You want to make a list of all of your resources, your savings, your scholarships, your 529, your GI Bill, whatever you have. You want to talk to your students realistically about what your family can afford. You want to gather information about the cost of each school, and then you're going to update that cost information as the schools send you their financial aid award letters. Then once you have all of the school's financial aid award letters, you're going to think really flexibly about how to accomplish everybody's goals using the resources you have super efficiently. This is a little bit complicated, but mostly the complicated is just thinking and understanding and maybe getting a little bit of outside guidance on, hey, well, what if you did it this way? Well, what if you did it that way? We are all flexible people. Like, this is how we get through military life. So I know that you could do this. It's not insurmountable. So if you have questions available now, I am going to stop. Am I going to stop sharing? Is that the smartest idea, Kelly?
Hmm, I think you can leave it up just so people know that we're in the question asking phase.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Kate, thank you for being with us today. I know you mentioned that this could easily be a 3-hour webinar, but it never felt like we were just skimming the surface. And you shared a lot of practical insight and some really great tips. And I'm sure that everyone is going to leave with something that they, can apply, and we appreciate that. So, as Kate said, at this point, we're going to move into our Q&A session. And if you haven't already, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get to as many as we can with the time we have remaining. And while we're waiting on that, um, Kate, I would just jump in and I'm curious, you've covered a number of programs and resources today, even beyond the GI Bill. So is there one that veterans or, I guess anyone in the military connected community are often surprised to learn that they may be eligible for outside of the GI Bill?
So one benefit that's really tricky, but I think is a little bit underutilized, but I hesitate to say that because it's tricky, is the Veterans Rehabilitation and Education benefit
Hmm.
that veterans can use from the VA to accomplish specific educational goals. If their disability makes their current job difficult for them to do, if their current job exacerbates their disability, or if they are unable to find employment because of their disability, VRE may help them not only with education, but also with other tools to. So, say you're a nurse and your back is really jacked up.
Hmm.
Maybe you could convince VRE to let you go get a master's so you could do healthcare administration. I do know a lot of people struggle because it is very much a demonstrate a need and get someone to agree with you about that need. And it can be frustrating for people in the program, but it can also be very, very powerful. And that doesn't tap into any of the rest of your family's benefits. So if the veteran can use VRE to accomplish a goal that leaves more benefits, more savings, more GI Bill for the rest of their family.
Yeah, I love that. And that's great to know. And we actually have a really good piece. I'm glad you mentioned the VRE. We have a really great piece. I think we may even have more than one on veteransaves.org. So be sure to visit there to check that out, because that's good to know. Amy, do we have any questions?
We do. We have a couple questions. And so I'm going to start with this first one, Kate, if you're ready. Um, how does the GI Bill and DEA benefits, and I'm not sure exactly what they mean by DEA, but I'm sure assuming you do, DEA benefits work for grad school?
So either of them can be used for grad school. You cannot use them consecutively. Now, there are the post 9/11 GI Bill, children age out of it when they are age 26. So that's a factor you want to keep in mind. Spouses don't have that limitation. Whether the spouse has an expiration date on their post 9/11 GI Bill benefits depends on when their service member left the military.
Mhm.
There was a cutoff in 2013, but so most of our younger spouses are going to have unlimited post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, but they definitely want to check and see, because if they've got a 15-year deadline on theirs and their spouse got out in 2012, well, 15 years from then is coming up real darn soon, right? You want to get on that.
Mhm.
So you want to look at your expiration dates is one of the things to consider. Also, they can't be used they can't be used simultaneously. So you can't get both the post 9/11 GI Bill and DEA at the same time. So again, you want to get back into the strategy of, does it make more sense for student A, let's just say it's dad, to use DEA to get their master's degree because they're going to live at home anyway, so the housing allowance isn't maybe as big a deal, to their family, or they know their kid is going to a super, University of Chicago, and then get huge bang for your buck by using the post 9/11 GI Bill at the University of Chicago. So they're both usable for grad school, but you want to look into how much benefit you're going to get out of it, whether the housing allowance is important to you, and then whether or not you personally have an expiration date on your benefits.
Did you say what DEA stood for? Did I miss that?
Short for Survivors and Dependents Educational Assistance.
Okay.
It's also called Chapter 35.
Okay, that's what I was wondering if it was Chapter
yeah,
35 as you explained it. Yeah, okay.
people get confused because each one of the education benefits is also called by the chapter of the law that it's from. And so sometimes people are crossing paths by using different terminology.
Great. Okay. Great answer. Thank you. A couple more. One, we'll back up a little bit because you mentioned the Montgomery GI Bill and you mentioned the post 9/11 GI Bill. And the question is there a short answer to what the difference is?
The post 9/11, the Montgomery GI Bill is a buy-in program that the service member, and those benefits are only available to the service members. They're not transferable. When the service member enters the military, they can choose to purchase Montgomery GI Bill benefits. Many people think that it's like the old version, and in fact, it's still in existence. People are still buying into it. It's not a bad program. There are some planning reasons why someone would want to spend $1,200 to have access to these benefits, even if it doesn't seem obvious up front. The post 9/11 GI Bill, there's no enrollment, there's no buy-in. It is strictly based on days of service after September 11th, 2001, and you earn your benefits based upon days of service, qualifying service, which is what gets complicated for our Guard and Reserve members because not all of their service is qualifying. But after 3 years of qualifying, so at 90 days, you get 36 months of the post 9/11 GI Bill. After 3 years, you get 36 months of the full benefit, that $30,000 a year, the monthly housing allowance. After 6 years of service, you can transfer that to an eligible family member, and that incurs a 4-year service obligation. So that's the one that's transferable. Also, because the Montgomery GI Bill is a flat rate, that tuition plus yellow ribbon program plus housing allowance, the post 9/11 GI Bill is potentially way bigger, right? But if we're talking about a spouse or a child, we are talking about the post 9/11 GI Bill.
Right. Now, but you mentioned the buy-in, and that led to another question. And you said $1,200. Is that a one-time thing? Is that a yearly thing?
That's one time, $100 a month for the first 12 months.
Perfect. Okay. And so then that leads me into our next question that kind of goes along with the GI Bill is the BAH and the housing allowance that goes along with it. You know, you always get questions about that. And I think you did a great job of breaking down how it pays based on the days you're in school. But the next question is, and you mentioned this a little bit, is we know that it pays by zip code based on the basic BAH stuff that is out there. And for those that may not know, there is a calculator that you can go use out there, and you put in your rank and the zip code, and it tells you, you know, what your BAH will be, and know that that changes every year. But the question that was posed was, and I know this, I think, but I want you to chime in. It caps at, is it E5 or E6 that you're paid on? Right?
Everybody gets E5 with dependents. Does not matter what your pay grade, what the sponsor's pay grade is or was. The MHA rate is tied to E5s with dependents. Now, a lot of people just say, well, it's just BAH. And it is a little bit different because while it is tied to that E5 with dependents BAH rate, the year that it runs on is different. So, right, we all know that BAH runs January to December. The MHA rate does not kick in until August. So whatever that rate was for an E5 with dependents at that location in January, that becomes next year's academic year rate in August. And then that rate continues until the following July. And for to get into the weeds a little bit, right? We already know that there's quite a lag between when BAH rates the data gets collected
Mm-hmm.
and when those rates take effect, right? There
Mm-hmm.
could be a lag of really, it could be a tremendously long time,
Yes.
but at least not 8 or 9 months. And in highly volatile locations, those 8 or 9 months can make a really big difference. And then when you factor in that the MHA year doesn't start, like the earliest the MHA rate is getting calculated on data from 13 months ago. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something to know. Just that's me getting boring policy wonky.
No, that's good. Okay, a couple more that I have. The first one, and I've seen this happen to someone, and so I'm glad someone posed this question. And it's about transferring to the spouse or children. Um, there are some time frames out there, correct? Is there that it has to be transferred? You have to have a certain number of years in service left. Is that correct? Can you break that down for us?
Right. So you cannot transfer benefits until you have 6 years of service. And it's a key thing to note because this is a holdup for a lot of people, is that while you have a 4-year service obligation when you transfer your benefits, you only incur that service obligation with the first transfer of benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I have a mutual friend, Sam. When he reached 6 years of service, he transferred his post 9/11 GI Bill benefits to his spouse. They did not have any children at the time, but that started his 4-year service obligation clock. So when he reached 10 years of service, he fulfilled his service obligation. And then when they subsequently had kids, he could add his kids as long as you're still serving. You can't add anybody new once you leave the service. So that's another one that really throws people off. A couple other things I want to throw out there about that transfer is sometimes for our enlisted folks, they run into trouble because they don't have 4 years of service left. And so they can't transfer. So they need to work maybe with their, every branch uses different words, but with their assignments person, maybe they need to re-enlist for another 12 months so that they have 4 years left on their contract so that they can do that. I encourage people when they get to that 6 years to really start working with their education people and their assignments people so that they know exactly when they can pull that trigger on transferring those benefits. And then two other things I want to point out about those transfer deadlines. Number one is if you do not fulfill that 4-year service obligation, that transfer never happened. And sometimes the VA won't notice and they'll go ahead and let you go to school. And then they'll come back and say, you owe us $70,000 for benefits that we paid out because you did not fulfill your service obligation. So it is critical that the service member tracks this stuff. Like they are ultimately responsible for making sure. I think I've shared with you, I screenshot the transfer of benefits page in our Mail Connect account once a year. I screenshot it and I just put it in a file and it says right in there, service obligation fulfilled, because I don't want anybody to come back to me 25 years from now and tell me that this service obligation did not get fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
The last little trick and tip that I will throw out there is if you're using my strategies and you're moving post 9/11 GI Bill benefits around kids and you've left the service, make sure you don't zero out anybody who might want to use benefits in this future. Because once they get zeroed out, if you're not in the service anymore, you can't give them more benefits. So that kid or spouse or whoever needs to keep 7 days or 2 months or whatever in their name so that they remain in the system and you've got some flexibility. Now, like my oldest two kids are beyond 26. So we can go ahead and zero them out. They can't use this benefit anymore. It's not available to them. But sometimes people will get hung up because they'll use a kid's all their benefits and then they'll go to give them more benefits and they can't.
Right. Now, after they get out, as long as they've allotted, clarify that a little bit for us. So as long as, like, let's say my husband, he got out, he gave me a little bit, he gave, and both children a little bit. Now he's out. And let's say we decide I'm not going to ever use them. Maybe he wants to zero me out, but he can go in there and change the children's, any of our allotments still after he's out, as long as we've been assigned. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right,
The
right.
service member always retains the right to modify or even revoke the
Mhm.
transfer of benefits that they made.
And then one more question we have in the Q&A. Well, we got a couple, but I'm going to ask this one last one about student loans. GI Bill was what? And this person asked, what happens if they transfer it and they just never use it?
This goes away.
What? There's. Mhm.
And I do want to throw out there that sometimes people get really hung up on, I got to use every single day of the GI Bill. And it's a valuable benefit. You want to use as much of it as you can. But sometimes using it the smartest way to use it means that you don't use all of it. Like if you have a kid who's going to University of Chicago and can get $90,000 a year's worth of benefits out of it, but you end up leaving 2 months, that's probably still a better value for your family than if you used every single benefit at Anne Arundel Community College, right? Now,
Right.
maybe we can use University of Chicago and the rest of it can get used up at Anne Arundel Community College, but don't get so hung up on if I don't use all 36 months, I've completely like blown up my entire financial plan. If
Mhm.
you just got $360,000 worth of benefit out of it, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Great.
Um,
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Kate. A lot of clarity there.
Lots of it. And
Mhm.
Amy, I'm not sure if we have any more. I would probably, do we have any more? Okay.
Nope,
I was
that's
going
it.
to say, and this is just a question for me because I always like to do kind of a sum up at the end of these webinars. And like I said, you've shared a lot today. So for anyone who may have joined us a little bit late or, just to kind of reinforce those top takeaways, like if you had to leave everyone with like your top three things to remember about, this webinar or just paying for college as a veteran or a military family, what would they be?
First thing is to do this with a plan. Do
Mhm.
not approach paying for college like with the attitude of we're just going to figure it out, because that is almost always how I see people get themselves into some real tough situations that no one wants to be in. The second thing is to make sure you truly understand all of the pros and cons and aspects of the benefits that are available to you. There are so many resources out there. The VA website is real good. Um, my book is not bad. There are blog posts, there are Facebook groups, there are all kinds of places that people can go and learn about this. But what makes me the saddest is when somebody comes to me and they've got like a financial catastrophe on their hands that happened because they didn't have information, because the information is out there. And so let's all get real, real, real smart before we do this.
Great advice.
Super great. And well, thank you, Kate. I mean, those were great questions, everyone. And thank you, Kate, for taking the time to answer those in depth. And again, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. My son actually graduates tomorrow from college. So yeah. So that was
Congratulations.
helpful. But I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us, and we know your time is valuable, so thanks for spending some of your day with us. As I mentioned earlier, you will receive an email with today's recording for you to reference back to. And if you'd like to explore more of the resources that Kate mentioned, you can also visit her website at Kate Horrell, HORRELL.com. And of course, you can reference back the webinar for the spelling in the website. You can visit her website for those resources. And if you're not already part of the Veteran Saves community, we invite you to take the Veteran Saves Pledge at veteransaves.org. It's a free way to receive practical financial tips and get support and tools and resources throughout the year to help you save more and reduce debt and really, get that clear view of your money and build that financial stability. So again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks so much. Thank you, Kate. Bye, everyone.